And now, another batch of essential musical terms. In classical music, the word beat simply refers to a recurring regular pulse. So in contrast to the current colloquial use of beat to refer to an interesting and complex rhythmic groove, in classical terminology, a beat is something much, much simpler. It's just a recurring, regular series of pulses equally spaced in time. That doesn't sound very musical. So in classical music, these beats are usually organized into some kind of recurring pattern of stressed beats and unstressed beats, and this is called a meter. Here's the previous set of pulses, but now organized: strongest, weak, strong, weak, strongest, weak, strong, weak. A typical 4-beat pattern. Those stresses were achieved purely through volume, which is a very crude way of doing things. Here is a somewhat more sophisticated way of organizing them that also uses different tones and different harmonies to reinforce the sense of strong versus weak beats. Now, if the human brain gets a completely consistent pattern over and over again, we tune it out. So every now and then we like to hear a surprise. Syncopation is the term that refers to a rhythmic surprise in music, and it can take any of several forms. It could be that a normally weak beat is played strong, or a normally strong beat is weak or perhaps missing entirely, or a rhythmic accent might occur between beats. Here's an example that takes what you just heard previously, and in the last bar, the first strong beat is omitted completely, and then the instruments enter in between beats where previously there was no activity. In classical music, the term for the overall speed is tempo, the Italian meaning time. In a typical classical instrumental composition, such as a sonata or string quartet or symphony or concerto, the individual sections or movements don't carry individual titles. They're simply referred to by their tempo marking. So it's useful to know what these are. I won't provide individual examples in this video because over the course of the semester you will hear many, many examples of each, and it would be a bit much to try to absorb all of them all at once. So this is just an overview. The terms come to us in Italian. A kind of central nondescript tempo, or norm, is moderato, moderate. The principal fast tempos are allegro, which means joyful, vivace, which is faster, lively, and faster still, presto, pressed, hurried. For the slow tempos, working our way from right to left, moderately slow is andante, literally walking. Slow is adagio, at ease. And then slower than that, various terms: grave, heavy, largo, large, and lento, slow. Those are some of the principal signposts, and then there are all sorts of variations on them, shades that are slightly slower or slightly faster. For example, if you use a diminutive, such as etto or inno, at the end of the word, that means not so much. So sort of andante, andantino, it's not quite as slow as andante, or allegretto, sort of allegro, not as fast as a true allegro. Or to intensify, you'll see a word such as assai, meaning quite, or molto, meaning very, or the suffix issimo, the superlative. So presto is fast, really, really fast is prestissimo. Another key concept is that of texture, which in music refers to the relationships among the musical components. These components are referred to as voices, even if they're being played by instruments without anyone literally singing them. The most common is the category that we call homophony, which refers to a melodic line with a simple chordal accompaniment. Its accompanying lines all share the same rhythm, so homo, same. Another way of thinking of this is that the accompanying lines are all mutually dependent. Here's an example of homophony. This is from a string quartet by Haydn. The musical texture of polyphony involves simultaneously combining many contrasting melodic lines with contrasting rhythms, so that there's a high degree of independence among the musical lines. This takes considerably more skill, and a word that will come up again and again is counterpoint, which refers to this ability to write contrasting melodic lines that all miraculously work together. Counterpoint is the English version of the Latin contrapunctus. This comes from contra, the same root that gives us contrast, and punct, point, which refers to the notation of musical tones on paper as dots at various visual heights. Here's an example of polyphony from the Renaissance, even before the Baroque era. This is by the composer Josquin de Prez. A special category of polyphony is imitative polyphony, in which all voices mutually echo a consistent theme or subject, and after they've fulfilled that obligation to imitate, they can move in freely contrasting ways. The simplest version of this you've all sung in childhood, what we call a round. A round is imitative polyphony that's just a very, very simple melody on one harmony. More complex versions truly test a composer's skill. One that we'll encounter later on is what's called a fugue. Here's the beginning of a fugue by Bach. Note that the subject enters in one voice, and then a second voice enters with the subject at a different pitch level. And while the second voice is playing the subject, the first voice goes on to do something else, contrasting melodically and rhythmically. And after a while, a third voice enters with the subject, and the first two voices each move on to do something else that contrasts with that subject and with each other. In summary, the most important point for you now is to understand that until the 19th century, counterpoint, this ability to write intricate polyphony, was what separated the professionals from the amateurs in the field of writing music. In the long run, the more you pay attention to this in the context of concert performances and listening to recordings, you'll see that it represents a significant aspect of different musical styles. In the Renaissance, the ideal texture was a polyphony in which all voices participate equally, such as you heard in the Josquin example. In the Baroque era, there was a polarization of the texture with an emphasis on the outer voices, the melody on the top and the bass at the bottom, and everything in between was de-emphasized, regarded as essentially harmonic filler, sometimes simply improvised, such as with figured bass. And this, you might recall, is the age of absolutism. In the classical era, under the influence of Enlightenment philosophy, composers turned to trying to create music that would sound very simple and balanced and clear. It might take considerable skill to write, but the idea was to make it sound as though anyone inspired to